I'm a middle-aged office worker, the kind who runs on spreadsheets and caffeine. Lunch breaks are my reset button, a quick escape from the fluorescent lights and ringing phones. Starbucks is my usual stop, a place where the coffee is predictable and the noise becomes white static. That day, I was running on fumes. Back-to-back meetings had left me bleary-eyed, and the thought of that first sip of coffee was the only thing keeping me upright. I joined the queue, watching the line inch forward, desperate for my turn. I didn't notice the woman behind me until her hand closed around mine. Starbucks was its usual midday chaos. Baristas calling out names, steam hissing from machines, and the rich smell of espresso hanging heavy in the air. The line stretched toward the door, a mix of suits, students, and parents juggling strollers. I stood sandwiched between two conversations, one about deadlines and the other about oat milk substitutions, counting the seconds until caffeine would hit my system. A man walked in, sharp, deliberate steps, his face set like stone. Behind him, a woman followed. Pale and gaunt, she looked out of place in her high-waisted skirt and blouse that screamed another decade. Her wide, darting eyes never settled, and every movement seemed hesitant, like she wasn't used to being here at all. The woman's movements were erratic, her hands twitching as she clutched her cup. Her eyes darted around the room, fast, panicked. I tried not to stare, but she was impossible to ignore, standing there like a misplaced figure in her faded clothes. The man beside her muttered something under his breath, his jaw tight, his impatience like a force pushing her forward. Suddenly, she turned to me, her voice trembling. "What year is it?" My mind blanked. Before I could react, her coffee slipped from her shaking hands, shattering on the floor. I crouched down instinctively, reaching for the scattered pieces of her cup. Before I could gather anything, her cold, trembling hand clamped around mine. I froze. She leaned in close, her voice a frantic whisper that barely reached my ears. "He's going to kill me." My eyes shot up to the man standing over us. His expression was carved from ice, sharp and unflinching. "Get up, she's fine," he barked, his voice low and controlled, but his glare burned through me. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't right. I stayed there, unmoving, as something told me I couldn't let this go. My heart pounded as I stood and called out, louder than I meant to. "She needs help!" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. The barista froze mid-order, staring. The man's face hardened and he grabbed the woman's arm, yanking her toward the door with a growled, "We're leaving!" She stumbled, but before they could move, the manager stepped in front of them, arms out. "Sir, you need to wait here." The man's voice rose in anger, barking threats, but it didn't matter. Someone had already dialed 911. The sirens came faster than I expected, and as the doors flew open, the man's fight was over. The police told me later the full, horrific truth. The woman had been kidnapped in 1995, nearly 30 years ago, when she was just 19. For decades, she'd been held captive, locked away, and subjected to unimaginable abuse. Her captor was moving out of state, and this coffee stop was an unplanned risk he couldn't avoid. He brought her inside because leaving her in the car was too dangerous. That tiny sliver of freedom was all she needed. Asking for help, grabbing my hand, was her desperate chance at escape. I couldn't stop thinking about her voice, trembling but brave, whispering for her life. The woman was taken to the hospital for care, her frail body finally safe from the horrors she had endured. Authorities said they were working to reunite her with her remaining family, though decades of trauma had left scars no one could erase. The man who stole her life was arrested, his face now plastered across headlines as the monster he truly was. I thought about how ordinary the day had started. I just wanted my coffee, a break from my routine. I never expected to save someone's life. Sometimes you never know what someone's been through or who's standing right next to you. I always thought Starbucks was my safe spot. Busy enough to feel secure, public enough to not worry about anything strange. But one day, that all changed. Now, every time I walk in for my usual coffee, I look over my shoulder, waiting for something to happen again. I'm a 35-year-old office worker, always busy with emails and meetings. Starbucks is part of my routine. Same location, same order, same seat in the corner. I thought I knew the place inside out. Until this day. It was a quiet Thursday morning, the kind where the hum of the espresso machines blends with low conversations. The place wasn't crowded, just a handful of people spread out across their tables, heads down in laptops or phones. I ordered my usual, found my corner seat, and opened my laptop, ready to squeeze in an hour of work before the day swallowed me whole. Across the room, an older man sat alone at a table. He wore a loose hoodie, hood up despite the warmth inside. What stood out was that he didn't have a drink or food. His gaze, steady and unblinking, was fixed in my direction. I glanced at my screen, trying to ignore it. 10 minutes passed before I glanced up again. The old man had moved. He now sat directly in front of me, one table closer, his hood still up. I avoided his eyes, pretending to focus on my screen, but I could feel it. His stare never wavered. The sudden call of a barista broke the quiet. "Caramel macchiato!" I jumped slightly, my fingers pausing over the keyboard. Across from me, the man didn't react. No flinch, no blink, just the same expressionless gaze. I took a deep breath. It's fine, I told myself. Public places are full of odd people. I went back to typing. A few minutes later, I noticed his hands moving. The man had pulled out a small, battered notebook, scribbling something onto its pages. He'd pause, look up at me, then go back to writing. The pattern was deliberate, unsettling. My pulse quickened. I pretended to check my phone, using it as a cover to watch him. Every glance confirmed it. He was focused on me. I stood, trying to seem casual as I gathered my things, aiming for a table closer to the door. As I passed him, my eyes flicked to his notebook. There in dark ink was my full name, underlined. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, my steps measured to mask the panic building inside me. As I passed his table, my eyes darted toward the notebook again. My name was written multiple times, surrounded by strange scribbles and numbers I couldn't make sense of. He looked up, his faint smile freezing me in place. "Leaving so soon? I was hoping we could talk," he said, his voice low and rasping. My throat tightened. "I don't know you. Why do you have my name?" He didn't answer. Instead, he calmly flipped a page. Written there. Today's date. Starbucks corner table. My body moved before I could think. I bolted out the door, nearly colliding with someone on their way in. Outside, I kept walking fast, my head turning back every few steps. He wasn't following. He just sat there, still watching me through the window, that faint smile unmoving. At work, I stayed distracted, trying to shake it off. By lunchtime, I'd convinced myself he was harmless, a strange, lonely man looking for attention. But when I got home that evening, my chest tightened. Stuck to my front door was a crumpled Starbucks napkin. In shaky handwriting, it read, "See you tomorrow." A week later, I packed up and moved to a new apartment across town. I never set foot in that Starbucks again. I changed routines, took different routes to work, and avoided sitting in one place too long. Despite it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd show up again. To this day, I don't know how he knew my name or why he chose me. People say public spaces are the safest, but that's not always true. Sometimes the most terrifying things happen in broad daylight, surrounded by strangers, when you're certain nothing can go wrong. I'm just a guy with a typical 9-to-5 office job, a routine that's as predictable as the coffee I order every afternoon. I'm in my mid-40s, trying to keep up with life's demands while finding small moments of peace in places like Starbucks. Nothing ever really surprises me. I've been to countless Starbucks in my life, but that afternoon was different. The usual hum of conversations and clattering cups was missing. People stood in line, silent, heads low, as though no one wanted to be noticed. I ordered my drink like always, but my hands felt unsteady, gripped by something I couldn't name. In the far corner, a man sat alone, his duffel bag pulled close to his chest. He didn't sip his drink or scroll his phone. He just sat there whispering to himself, his eyes darting. No one else seemed to look his way. I did. I walked into the Starbucks, surprised by how packed it was for a random weekday afternoon. The line snaked all the way to the door, filled with parents pushing strollers, teens in hoodies, and couples glued to their laptops. In the far corner, a man sat hunched over a large duffel bag, his face hidden behind a mess of greasy hair. Despite the cool air, he was sweating. His drink sat untouched, his hands gripping the bag like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He muttered under his breath, low enough that I couldn't make out the words. The baristas exchanged nervous glances, whispering between themselves. They'd glance at him, then quickly look away. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, but it lingered as I sat with my drink, unsure whether to stay or leave. A barista hesitantly approached the man, her voice soft as she asked if everything was okay. He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the bag, his hand twitching as though he couldn't decide whether to react. Then, without warning, a loud clank echoed from the bag, freezing everyone in place. The noise was sharp, metallic, something heavy shifting inside. I watched as the man, wide-eyed and trembling, unzipped the bag just enough to peek inside. There was a mess of tangled wires, blinking lights, and metal pipes. My heart sank. I knew instantly, it wasn't just junk. It was a bomb or something close. I snapped out of my daze and bolted for the side exit, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. My hand was already on the door when I paused, something urging me to look back. Maybe I wanted to know if anyone else had escaped. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, but when our eyes met, I froze. The man grinned, wild, unhinged, and dropped the duffel bag. The moment his hand let go, I didn't wait another second. I threw myself through the door, just as a deafening boom shook the building, the force of it slamming me into the pavement outside. Outside, the siren screamed and smoke poured from the shattered windows. I sat on the curb, hands shaking, too numb to move. My heart raced, but my body was frozen. The news later called it a failed homemade device. The bomb didn't detonate fully, but it was enough to tear through half the store. They said the man was mentally ill, calling it a tragic incident. All I could think about was how close I'd been to dying. It wasn't tragedy, it was luck. Pure, unexplainable luck. I still go to Starbucks sometimes, but every time I hear the clink of ice in a metal shaker or the hiss of steam, I see his face and wonder, what if I hadn't looked back? If you enjoyed these horror stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Have you had your own terrifying experience at Starbucks or anywhere else? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching, and remember, you never know who's standing right next to you.